Have you ever stared at a mountain of Microsoft 365 audit logs and wondered, is any of this actually useful or am I just drowning in digital noise? You're not alone. Today, let's crack open some doors most admins just peek through, tying together Azure AD logs, Teams data, and SharePoint metrics. By the end, you'll see how these scattered points actually fit together and why you might be missing signals hiding in plain sight. The noisy data trap. Why most M365 telemetry gets ignored. Let's be honest, when you first open the Microsoft 365 admin portal, it looks like someone dropped a bucket of telemetry across your screen. Activity feeds, usage charts, audit logs, and security reports all fighting for your attention. Maybe you're on the clock because leadership wants proof that you're getting value from all those E5 licenses, or compliance is breathing down your neck to catch risky sign-in attempts. So you scroll, a little Teams activity graph here, a spike in SharePoint access there, endless columns of who clicked what and when. Pretty soon, it all starts to blend together, just another layer of static humming in the background while you're trying to grab something, anything that matters. If you've spent more time chasing your own tail in those activity reports than actually stopping a problem or optimizing spend, you're definitely not alone. But there's this pressure. You're supposed to justify cost, spot red flags, and prove you know what's happening in your environment. But when you're buried under a landslide of log entries, staring at default dashboards that only seem to surface how many Teams meetings happened last week, it's hard to know where to look first. Most admins treat these tools like a box to tick or a fire drill to run only after something goes wrong. You take a quick glance, maybe at licensing usage or mailbox growth, and then move on. Advanced capabilities like auditing file access patterns or threat detection alerts, often ignored unless you're troubleshooting or prepping for an audit. The bigger issue here isn't that telemetry is missing. If anything, Microsoft is providing too much. It's more data than most teams can process. And even though all these charts and logs should feel empowering, in practice, it's more like white noise. The disconnect comes from the way these tools are designed to show you a piece, never the whole puzzle. Each metric sits in its own silo. One window reveals Teams meeting counts, another buries you in SharePoint file downloads, but they don't talk to each other. So what you miss are the actual connections between these metrics that reveal how your organization is working or not working. For example, maybe you spotted a sudden jump in Teams activity last Tuesday, right after an all-hands announcement. So you pat yourself on the back for increased engagement. What you don't see, unless you're toggling between dashboards, is that at the same time, Azure AD sign-ins spiked for temporary contractors, and one of your SharePoint sites had a weird burst of downloads. Default dashboards don't highlight those patterns together. They sit in separate tabs, waiting for someone to fit the pieces. So while you think you've captured the full picture, there's a strong risk that major blind spots are hiding right behind your best guesses. And let's talk about the reality of information overload. There's plenty of research out there on how IT teams end up stuck, paralyzed, because there are simply too many signals and not enough context. Gartner has found that when admins are presented with endless dashboards and disconnected streams, their confidence in data-driven decisions actually drops. Forrester's recent reports show that cognitive fatigue sets in fast. When every dashboard is shouting at you, those signals blur, and it's easy to stay reactive instead of proactive. There's a term for it, decision paralysis by data. Admins know the tools exist, but the sheer volume of telemetry tricking your brain into feeling busy while masking the stuff you really need to notice. It's pretty easy to blame the data, but the truth is M365 telemetry is only as useful as the relationships you build from it. If you treat audit logs, sign-in reports, and usage data as isolated checkboxes, all you'll ever see is noise. The moment you start thinking about what's really connected here, things shift. The gold isn't buried in the amount of telemetry Microsoft delivers, it's in how you connect the dots across multiple services and moments. That's what turns static into signals. I can't even count the number of stories I've heard where someone trusted a single usage report, never thought to connect it with licensing or feature adoption trends, and ended up wasting thousands on seats that nobody touched. The story usually goes something like this. Leadership wants proof that Teams is being adopted, so the admin runs a usage report that says X number of users signed in this month, but nobody checked which features they used or whether those users ever left the default chat. So the business thinks they're covered, the licenses stay paid, and the real opportunity to train people or optimize spend just floats away. All because no one mapped those data points together. The noisy data trap is real. But once you start looking for relationships, how a spike in sign-ins relates to file downloads, or whether inactive licenses line up with certain usage dips, suddenly those raw logs become a gold mine. The best admins aren't scrolling for vanity metrics. They're cross-referencing, layering data, and flagging gaps that would slip right past standard reports. So what does it actually look like to weave these separate signals together and spot the patterns that matter? That's where things really start to get interesting. Hidden connections, mapping telemetry across M365 services. Ever tried actually stacking up Azure AD sign-in logs with Teams chat patterns and SharePoint site usage just to see if anything jumps out? Most people don't. The tools pretty much encourage you to check one report, glance at another, and then move on. So you miss what's right between the lines. Most organizations run separate audits for each service. Security checks in Azure AD, adoption numbers in Teams, storage reports for SharePoint. You fix what looks broken in each silo, but the interesting stuff, the things that could save you days of chasing false leads or uncomfortable "we got breached" calls, just gets missed. Here's why that habit sticks around. Each of these telemetry feeds seems complicated enough by itself. You figure a spike in SharePoint downloads is just somebody backing up a site, or a drop in Teams calls means folks are in the office again. But let's say you look at them side by side. Suddenly the narrative shifts. Maybe those SharePoint downloads line up perfectly with high-risk logins from Azure AD, but because you're looking at two different tabs, the red flag never waves. There's a real risk when analysis stays siloed. Imagine a legit attack. Azure AD logs catch someone hammering passwords at 2 a.m. Security team says it's under control. Meanwhile, SharePoint has suspicious downloads, one right after each failed login. Nobody puts it together because your audit routines run on different days, managed by different IT folks. The result, you get a bunch of everything looks fine emails right until the data loss report lands. That's where telemetry triangulation comes in. Think of it like using at least 3 streams of telemetry at once, never relying on a single dashboard to tell you the story. Say you notice a spike in failed Azure AD sign-ins for a subset of users. Alone, that might be chalked up to password resets or travel. But if the same users suddenly show 0 Teams activity and a sharp dip in SharePoint site visits, what's that really telling you? It hints at a group locked out, deliberate account misuse, or even a forgotten deprovisioning step after a round of layoffs. Single sources stay ambiguous. It's only when the patterns reinforce each other, a trio of oddities stacking up, that you get the clarity to poke deeper. Take an enterprise that actually ran this play. They tracked sign-in activity but layered on Teams feature adoption logs, so not just who logged in, but which buttons they ever clicked. It turned out users were logging in daily but never touching advanced Teams features like breakout rooms or app integrations. The organization assumed everyone was collaborating at full tilt. In reality, users stuck to basic chat while richer tools gathered dust. By mapping usage across both systems, IT traced the issue to a missing round of training, something a single usage report never would have flagged. It doesn't end at security or adoption. Combine Exchange Online's message trace logs with Teams activity, and suddenly you see why project conversations stall. Maybe users are still defaulting to email, even for quick-fire updates. The message trace data will catch big threads and reply all storms, while Teams logs register near 0 messages. That's a recipe for bottlenecks, not to mention compliance headaches if critical project conversations are split across 2 tools. The opposite problem pops up too. Teams could have a flurry of messages, but Exchange shows minimal follow-up, hinting at information getting lost or missed deadlines brewing. Another connection that's easy to overlook is a license assignment versus true site usage. It's classic to see hundreds of SharePoint sites spun up after a big rollout with E5 licenses assigned just in case. Fast forward a few months, only a tiny fraction of those sites are being accessed, while the monthly bill holds steady. Line up your license logs next to site usage, and you spot pockets of waste that no one would pay attention to if looking in isolation. These aren't just anecdotes. Organizations that regularly map these relationships are the ones that catch risks and cost leaks long before they turn into budget meetings or post-incident reviews. To really drive this home, think about what qualifies as insight. And it's not just, here's a big number from Teams or someone downloaded a file. It's mashing up these numbers and events from 3 or more places until a story jumps out, like slowing SharePoint access combined with new contractor hires and Teams meeting invites going out to external domains. Those things feel random on their own, but the pattern suggests onboarding struggles or potential data exposure. That's the moment where you turn telemetry into actual useful signals. So when people say, "Oh, there's just too much M365 logging," what's really getting missed is that gold shows up only when you cross the streams. Suddenly, gaps in training, unassigned licenses, early security incidents, and even low morale get exposed by the way these logs line up together. New issues stand out. Nagging problems finally have a root cause to chase down. This cross-service mapping is the step most organizations never get around to, but it's where the biggest wins come from. Let's get practical. How do you actually bring these streams together? Not by reading 12 reports each morning, but with dashboards and analytics that do the connecting for you. That's what we'll look at next. From raw logs to real decisions, building actionable dashboards. If you've ever flipped through dashboard after dashboard and felt like you're going in circles, you're not alone. Everywhere you look in Microsoft 365, there's a dashboard promising insights. But when everything's pivot tables and colorful charts, it quickly becomes routine. It's the IT version of wallpaper, supposed to be helpful, but mostly just sitting there. The reality is we're drowning in neatly formatted data and still left wondering why a Skype to Teams migration flopped or why the finance team's mailbox is always close to tipping over. Everyone loves the idea of data-driven decisions, but the on-the-ground experience is usually just sorting through endless charts with very little confidence about what matters most or what to do next. That's a problem that goes deeper than just too much information. Most dashboards in M365 summarize what's already happened. They're like those airport screens showing all the flights, except instead of helping you plan, they list every plane that's ever taken off in the last month. Sure, it looks impressive, but it won't tell you if the runway is iced over. It's a setup that rewards admins for staying busy rather than being effective. You might notice a general uptick in Teams usage or an occasional drop in SharePoint storage, but these surfaces rarely connect the threads. They're not going to spell out why Power Automate flows start failing, or alert you when a sudden burst of Azure AD sign-in errors lines up perfectly with an external phishing campaign. There's a major gap between passive reporting and active monitoring. The difference isn't just technical, it's practical. Take the case of an admin who caught a spike in failed Power Automate runs. The surface level reports suggested service issues, but those failures mapped right onto a series of Azure AD authentication hiccups. Instead of logging a ticket with Microsoft and waiting days, the admin cross-referenced logs pinpointed the authentication service outage and got ahead of a business-wide flow failure. That sort of insight doesn't come from looking at a single dashboard, but from seeing where logs overlap and then asking, what's connected here that the default views are hiding from me? Research backs this up. When designers at the Nielsen Norman Group looked at what separated effective dashboards from the countless bland report pages, they found three elements: context, correlation, and prioritization. The most valuable dashboards help users quickly pinpoint not just anomalies, but how those outliers fit into the broader business context. The same holds true in IT. Surfacing a spike in sign-ins means little unless you know whether it's tied to new hires, a feature rollout, or a potential security incident. Isolated numbers encourage reactive thinking. Connecting them helps you act strategically. Combining telemetry feeds with actual business KPIs can transform your dash from just another weekly report into something leadership actually cares about. For example, overlay user adoption of new Teams features like breakout rooms or live polls with training completion rates in your learning platform. If you spot a group that's missing both, it's a clear signal to schedule a follow-up, not just file another audit. Or think about license assignment. Instead of pulling a static list and matching it with monthly usage, correlate these metrics directly. Watch how SharePoint site activity lines up with assigned licenses over time. Suddenly, those underused E5 subscriptions pop right out, and it's not just guessing who needs a renewal, it's targeting real savings. Let's walk through a practical case. Imagine building a Power BI dashboard that pulls together SharePoint usage logs, Teams activity stats, and Azure AD sign-in patterns all in one view. This isn't about cramming in as much data as possible. Instead, you set up visual cues. Underused licenses go red. A spike in sign-ins with flatline Teams activity draws your attention. Gradual declines in SharePoint activity hint at teams losing momentum on key projects. It's the combinations, not the single data points, that let you spot outliers and, more importantly, act on them before someone writes a panicked email. That's how experts handle thresholds and alerts too. Instead of setting alarms for a single metric of more than 100 failed logins equals alert, they build rules that require a pattern across 2 or more streams. Maybe a failed login alert only kicks in if SharePoint file downloads simultaneously increase. Or a Power Automate failure warning only pings when tied to Teams workflow interruptions. This avoids false positives and, more critically, pulls your team's focus to the exact moments that matter. In the end, the dashboards that are truly worth your time aren't the ones summarizing raw numbers. They're the ones surfacing real actionable signal from the noise. These dashboards let you spot a slow-moving outage before it bubbles up, predict which teams are about to need support, or call out adoption gaps before renewal time. M365 telemetry is full of hints, but without connecting the dots, those hints stay hidden. So after you've built dashboards that actually tell you something, the next real challenge shows up: how to turn those insights into decisions that pay off for the business. Action steps, turning telemetry insights into business value. Spotting trends in telemetry is one thing. Actually getting your business to act on them before budgets or productivity takes a hit is another story. Picture this: you finally pull together a dashboard that highlights 3 problem areas. Your most expensive licenses are underused, a new Teams feature isn't getting traction, and there's a cluster of failed Azure AD sign-ins. You send out the report, feeling like you've done your part. But what you get back is silence, or maybe a handful of questions about whether it's really worth doing anything. This happens more than most admins want to admit. There's often a gap between surfacing a solid set of insights and actually triggering change, and a lot of smart teams get stuck here. Business leaders want next steps, not just another list of issues, while IT worries about making the wrong call in a sea of gray areas. It's pretty common, especially in larger organizations, for analytics to pile up without any real mechanism for follow-through. Maybe there's an adoption committee or a licensing review meeting, but those can drift into cycles of let's revisit this next quarter, or we need more validation. In the meantime, those expensive E5 licenses keep ticking, and nobody's touched the Power BI premium perks. You've found the signals, but until you build them into something the business can actually move on, the dashboard just becomes another thing to ignore. This disconnect isn't a technical flaw, it's often a lack of process. That's where operationalizing telemetry comes in. Let's talk about building a simple playbook that takes insights and turns them into action. One straightforward move is automating license management. Set up a flow so that when license usage falls below a certain threshold, a ticket is automatically created to review or reassign it. No one has to scroll through CSV exports or get stuck in a monthly audit rut. Or think about feature adoption. When Teams logs show a whole group isn't using breakout rooms, the system can flag those users for targeted training. On the security side, you can configure rules where a burst of failed sign-ins, especially those that overlap with SharePoint file downloads, triggers an immediate security investigation, not just a passive alert on someone's long to-do list. It sounds basic, but this level of automation goes a long way. A global manufacturer put this approach into practice. They'd been running monthly usage reports that flagged hundreds of unused licenses, yet every renewal cycle, they were still renewing for the full headcount. Frustration simmered until they hooked telemetry from license assignment, usage, and user activity into a Power Automate workflow. Now, the system automatically highlights which users haven't touched a licensed app in 60 days, then routes that list straight to managers for review. They trimmed thousands off their licensing bill with no drama and used the savings to actually invest in user training and support. Power BI and Power Automate aren't just reporting tools, they drive this level of impact when used together. With Power BI, teams can create live dashboards that blend telemetry sources for self-service analytics. No waiting for the monthly IT report. Over in Power Automate, you can tie those dashboards directly to workflows that spin up emails, tickets, and even formal business processes. Alerts no longer feel generic or buried, they land with context. So the right people know why they're acting, not just that something happened. But here's something a lot of people miss: aligning these moves to what the business actually cares about. Without connecting your telemetry-driven actions to real objectives like boosting productivity, tightening compliance, or cutting costs, the effort risks becoming a showcase of what it can measure rather than what improves outcomes. Start simple. If low adoption of a feature means project delays, tie the alert and follow up directly to that business impact. If wasted licenses keep showing up, focus your reviews on the departments most affected by budget constraints, not just those with the biggest numbers. Of course, no automation is perfect. Go too far and you risk missing the nuance a human brings. Some usage dips have good reasons, maybe a project finished or the business is cycling through contractors. If workflows skip the sanity check, licenses might be yanked at the wrong time, or security reviews may spin up over perfectly normal behavior. Keeping a human in the loop at least for reviewing the most impactful recommendations, avoids these pitfalls and keeps trust high. So the real winners in M365 telemetry aren't those with the fanciest dashboards or the most granular logs. It's the organizations that use telemetry to actually move the needle, steering spend where it matters, focusing support where adoption lags, and closing security gaps before they grow. It's not about chasing every blip, but about creating a rhythm where data prompts action that aligns with business goals. After all, you're not collecting logs for the sake of box ticking. You're surfacing insights to drive real value and avoid missing what's right in front of you. With that shift from passive reporting to proactive business-aligned action, the original question returns: is all this telemetry just noise, or is it finally working as your competitive advantage? If you feel like you're drowning in graphs and audit logs, you're definitely not the only one. The difference between endless noise and surfacing real insights almost always comes down to connecting the right data points and backing it up with action. It's not about having another dashboard to show your boss. It's about focusing on which relationships actually tell you how your team works, where money is wasted, and when security is at risk. Start mapping those connections, and you'll get value from telemetry most admins never see. Want more like this? Subscribe and spend less time guessing with Microsoft 365.